The morning fog moved slowly through the deep valley like a quiet river in the sky. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But for the engineers standing at the edge of that valley, it was a reminder of something terrifying. Because somewhere above those clouds, they were about to build something the world had never seen before. A bridge so high that airplanes flying low could almost pass beneath it. A bridge that would stand higher than the Eiffel Tower, and a bridge that many experts believed should never even be attempted. But the real problem wasn't just the height. It was the fact that no machine on Earth could lift the massive sections needed to build it. No crane was tall enough. No existing system was strong enough. And if even one mistake happened at that height, thousands of tons of steel and concrete could come crashing down into the valley below. What nobody expected was that this impossible challenge would turn into one of the most daring engineering stories in modern history. Because building a bridge above the clouds wasn't just about construction. It was about courage, innovation, and a team of engineers who refused to accept the word impossible. And that story begins many years before the first pillar was even built. Long before the bridge existed, the small town of Millau in southern France was famous for something no city ever wants to be known for: traffic. Every summer, millions of tourists traveled from northern Europe to the sunny beaches of Spain, and nearly all of them passed through the same narrow valley. The journey looked simple on the map, but in reality, it was a nightmare. Cars had to descend through winding mountain roads into the valley, crawl through the crowded streets of the town, and then climb back up the mountains again. During holiday season, traffic jams stretched for miles. Sometimes travelers waited for 6 or 7 hours just to pass through the town. Local residents couldn't escape the chaos either. Their quiet mountain city had become a bottleneck for half of Europe. Eventually, the French government realized something had to change. They planned a new highway that would connect Paris to Spain directly. Most of the route was simple to build, but when the engineers reached the valley near Millau, they faced a terrifying obstacle: a massive canyon cut through the mountains, with the Tarn River flowing far below. The valley was more than 1,000 feet deep. To continue the highway, they had only 2 choices. They could build a long road down into the valley and back up again, which would defeat the purpose of the new highway. Or they could attempt something that had never been done before: a bridge high enough to cross the entire valley in a single line. At first, the idea sounded ridiculous. Experts pointed out that even the famous Golden Gate Bridge was much lower. Most bridges around the world were built over water at relatively small heights, but here engineers were being asked to construct a bridge nearly as tall as a mountain. Many specialists warned that strong winds alone could destroy such a structure. Others said the ground in the valley wasn't stable enough for pillars that tall. For years, the project remained just a dream on paper, but the traffic problem kept getting worse. Eventually, the French government decided they had no choice. They would build the bridge no matter how difficult it seemed. That decision marked the beginning of one of the most ambitious construction projects ever attempted. To design the bridge, the government turned to a famous architect whose work had already changed skylines around the world: Norman Foster. Foster understood immediately that this bridge couldn't be built like ordinary bridges. If the design was too heavy, the pillars would collapse under their own weight. If it was too flexible, strong winds could cause dangerous movement. And if even a small error happened in the calculations, the entire structure could fail. So Foster and his team began working on a design that looked almost impossible. They imagined a bridge that would appear light and elegant, almost like it was floating above the valley. But behind that graceful appearance would be incredible strength. 7 enormous concrete pillars would rise from the valley floor. On top of them, a long steel roadway would stretch across the sky. Above the road, tall pylons would hold massive cables that help support the bridge. If everything worked perfectly, the structure would become the tallest bridge in the world. But designing the bridge was only the beginning. Actually building it would be far more dangerous. Construction officially began in 2001. Immediately, engineers faced a problem they hadn't expected. Geologists studying the ground discovered that the valley floor was made of fractured limestone. Inside the rock were hidden cavities in underground spaces formed over thousands of years. If the foundations weren't carefully built, parts of the ground could collapse.
That meant every pillar needed extremely deep and stable foundations. But drilling deep into the mountain slopes carried its own risk. A landslide could bury equipment, or worse, workers. Despite the warnings, the construction teams moved forward. The first stage involved building the massive pillars that would hold the bridge. Each pillar had to rise hundreds of feet into the air, and they couldn't be perfectly straight cylinders either. The base needed to be thick and strong, while the top had to become thinner to reduce weight. That meant each section of concrete had a slightly different shape. Workers poured concrete in small stages, lifting heavy steel molds higher every few days. It was slow, exhausting work. Months passed, then a year, and gradually the pillars began climbing into the sky. One by one, the massive structures reached incredible heights. The tallest pillar eventually grew taller than the Eiffel Tower. But just when the team felt confident, another terrifying problem appeared. The bridge deck, the road itself, weighed tens of thousands of tons, and there was no crane in the world capable of lifting something that heavy to such a height. At first, engineers considered assembling the road sections in the valley and lifting them piece by piece. But calculations quickly showed that the pillars could be damaged by the forces involved. So the team needed a completely new strategy. That's when one of the most creative engineering solutions in history was proposed. Instead of lifting the bridge into place, they would push it. Massive steel sections of the road would be built on each side of the valley. Then powerful hydraulic machines would slowly push the sections forward across the pillars. Piece by piece, the bridge would slide into position above the valley. But here was the terrifying part. At certain moments, sections of the bridge would extend hundreds of feet into open air with no support underneath. If the balance calculations were wrong by even a tiny margin, the entire structure could collapse. Still, the engineers believed the system could work. Construction of the steel roadway began in large factories far from the valley. Thousands of steel pieces were manufactured with extreme precision. Even a difference the width of a human hair could cause problems during assembly. Convoys of trucks transported the giant steel sections to the construction site. More than 2,000 deliveries were needed. Once the pieces arrived, workers welded them together into enormous segments. Each one weighed hundreds of tons. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. Hydraulic machines slowly began pushing the first section forward. The steel structure crept ahead only a few centimeters at a time. Everyone on site watched carefully. Wind speeds were monitored constantly. If strong gusts appeared, work stopped immediately. Day by day, the bridge extended further across the valley. Months passed as the structure slowly moved forward. Eventually, sections from both sides began approaching the center. The final connection would be the most critical moment. If the alignment was wrong, the entire project could fail. On the day of the final push, cameras and journalists gathered to watch history unfold. Government officials stood nearby, waiting anxiously. Then the hydraulic system was activated one last time. Slowly, carefully, the two sides of the bridge moved closer together. And finally, with almost perfect precision, they connected. The alignment difference was less than a centimeter. After years of effort, the impossible bridge was finally complete. When it opened to the public in December 2004, the world saw something breathtaking. The Millau Viaduct stretched gracefully across the valley like a ribbon in the sky. At its highest point, the structure reached more than 1,100 feet above the ground. Drivers crossing the bridge sometimes found themselves surrounded by clouds. It truly felt like driving through the sky. But the emotional impact of the project went far beyond engineering success. For the workers who spent years risking their lives high above the valley, the bridge represented something deeply personal. Many of them remembered standing on narrow platforms hundreds of feet in the air while powerful winds shook the structure. They remembered the long nights when calculations were checked again and again, afraid that a tiny mistake might bring disaster. Families waited at home, knowing their loved ones were working in one of the most dangerous construction projects in the world. Yet despite the risks, the team continued pushing forward. Because they knew they weren't just building a bridge, they were proving something important. They were proving that human creativity and determination could overcome challenges that once seemed impossible. Local residents also felt the emotional change. For decades, their town had been known for traffic jams and frustration. Now travelers from around the world came to see the bridge itself. Tourists stopped just to admire the view. The once overlooked valley had become home to one of the greatest engineering achievements ever built. Even today, the bridge continues to inspire engineers and architects everywhere. It reminds them that innovation often comes from moments when problems seem unsolvable. And sometimes, the boldest ideas are the ones that sound the most impossible at first. Looking back, it's almost hard to believe how close this project came to never existing. For years, it was dismissed as unrealistic. Many experts warned that the risks were too great, but a group of determined engineers chose to look at the challenge differently. Instead of asking why it couldn't be done, they asked how it could. Step by step, problem by problem, they found solutions that had never been tried before. They pushed the limits of engineering, construction, and imagination. And in the end, they built something extraordinary. Today, as drivers cross the Millau Viaduct,
Many of them may not realize the incredible story behind the structure beneath their wheels. They see a beautiful bridge floating above the clouds, but hidden inside that graceful design are years of struggle, risk, and human determination. A reminder that the greatest achievements in history often begin with an idea that seems impossible, and sometimes the only way to reach the clouds is to build a road straight through them.